Midnight Gospel is a show with weird concepts. The very first episode opens up with the main character, Clancy, interviewing a president from another planet. The interview is used for his broadcast Spacecast. Everyone in the universe can listen to what he has to say. And during the interview, they talk about the nuance of legalizing drugs, the fact that Clancy has recently started a new type of meditation, and a bunch of other existential stuff. The weirder things, however, happens in the background. While the interview is happening, they are surrounded by the threat of zombie apocalypse. And yet, they just go along with it. They keep on talking and fighting, talking and fighting. Their conversation never addressed the urgency to survive. The action scene is much like an eye candy for the audience, a cherry on top to sweeten our eyes so that the melted sugars can fixate our gaze with its gooey stickiness. It's very much like the things you see nowadays online, where they put some mobile gameplays on the bottom to trick you into finishing the video. It's a narrative choice that makes sense when you consider the weirdness of Midnight Gospel comes from the premise. Midnight Gospel is not just a guy making podcasts in an alien multiverse. It is a podcast inside a podcast. The audio from the interviewer and the interviewee comes from the actual podcast that Duncan Trussell had made. Trussell is the one behind the voice of Clancy. Midnight Gospel is a show that tries to turn a podcast into an animation. Therefore, it has no substance on the visual front. The animation is supposed to work as a complement to the audio. And because the original material started as a broadcast, it makes it hard to link the ideas of different speakers into one singular narrative. So in the show, Clancy was designed to have a machine that could let him travel to different planets to meet different characters in the universe. This way, it can build a self-contained episodic story, with each speaker having its own little planet, its own little bubble. The way I say it is like, with each new human encounter, a different universe is formed. With all that being said, all these stories do have one thing in common. It's always about existential problem. And perhaps the idea of death is so present throughout the whole show that the planet and the interviewees always crumble and die in the end. And when I say it gets existential, I really mean it. In episode 2, the guest, while being ground up like a mincemeat, talks about the experience of his father's cancer and her alcoholic problem. The trippy, mind-boggling imagery hooks you, while the unique experience of each guest slowly creeps on your back and makes you want to see what kind of introspection they have for their life. This is supposed to be the formula of the show. But then, I reach episode 5. Clancy wakes up from his hangover and finds out his flower, Rose, is dead. So he slouches on his chair, uses the internet to search the solution for reviving flower. The solution...
So obvious. Music, of course.
It's weird. He didn't even interview anyone at that point, but he already points out the conclusions for that episode is music. It's an answer with an unexpected turn. It's like playing a sliding puzzle where the answer is there all along. You just need to recognize which one is the right piece to move. And perhaps the reason why the solution that Clancy gave sounds so out of the blue is because we have been using tunnel vision to see death. Since the dawn of human civilization, humans have been escaping death because what comes after life is judgment, the possibility of punishment. The famous Egyptian mythology has the trial of weighing one's soul against the feather to warn mankind the danger of wrongdoing. This mythology, like many others, indicates that with the rise of social formation, death naturally became an unnatural process. It cannot be something that just happens. It is heavily charged with the notions of morality. The topic of death, in this way, gets hijacked into the topic of corrective measures. We need to perform the right actions to make sure the input of a lifetime can reap a good reward afterward. It shapes our mind slowly into thinking that dying itself is a problem, but what comes after death is still a problem. This fosters the transformation of accumulating deeds, a struggle against death, an active life force that tries to latch on to the living. And how is there a better metaphor for latching on to the life of living other than the story The Spider Thread? That is a famous short story by the Japanese writer Runosuke Akutagawa. It depicts an interactions between the Buddha and a cold-hearted criminal, Kandata. One day, Buddha is walking near a lotus pond, and upon this, he sees a man through the water. The man is Kandata, and he is suffering in hell. With no good deed to his name, Kandata did earn his rightful place in hell. However, he did once choose to save the life of his spider, so Buddha chooses to give him a chance. He grabs onto a spider and sends the spider thread down to hell. With the sight of glimmering thread, Kandata latches on to his silver lining. He climbs and climbs, slowly getting out of hell. But what he didn't realize is, other people are trying to climb from behind. Fearing the thin spider thread will break, Kandata claims that the spider thread is mine and mine only. And in that very instant, snap, the spider thread breaks right above the point where Kandata is hanging. The moral of the story can be interpreted in many different ways, but one that I like is the problem of faith. The spider thread broke not just because of his selfishness, it broke because he had no faith in Buddha. If Buddha gave you a chance, then you should not judge it. A thin-looking thread should have nothing to do with its durability. If your will is strong enough, then it is doable. Stories like these intensifies our feeling that escaping death is more than just making correct decisions. You need to equip yourself with the right mindset. And is it a surprise that the story The Spider Thread is being referenced in The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, a video game? Shouldn't it be obvious video game is the only creative medium that heavily employs death as a punishment? Even a silly chubby red cap character, which is designed to be family friendly, features an HP system for him to jump around. I'm talking about you, Diddy Kong. Or maybe Nas, I'm not sure, I've never played Earthbound. But definitely not a Pokemon trainer. And video games goes beyond the common saying of, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. Because even when it does kill you, it still makes you stronger. You keep on coming back from death, perfecting your skill, perfecting your choice to perfect the life of your character. Some people do it for fun, some people do it for a run. But for games that have multiple endings, we usually do it to feel good. We want the true ending. It is the ending that usually ends on a good note. On the other hand, games that are hard to beat require perfections because it is the only way to win. And how is there a better genre of games about difficulty and death than role-like games? Death is a certainty to escape hell. Dying, 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 and dying. That's the only way to go. It's like reincarnation. And this unique mechanics of role-like games reminds me of a quote from the Japanese comedian Takeshi Kitano. What is the meaning of 20,000 deaths? A human life is not 1 in 20,000 or 1 in 80,000. When people die, it means that the event of one person dying happens 20,000 times. Watching the body horror of a single character splashing its blood out over and over, it sure does look like the death of 20,000. But according to video game logic, it seems like to escape death is to try harder, grind harder. So, with all this previous setup, let me tell you about a game where death is lethally real. Hellblade Senua sSacrifice is one of my favorite games. It is about a woman, Senua, who goes on the journey to hell. She goes there with the help of many, or should I say, the voice of many.
Look really clearly.
Focus, Senua.
Focus. Focus and you'll see. What happens if you focus?
You see, Hellblade is a game about disability. Senua had experienced psychosis for all her life. It is a traumatic experience that tormented her family life, her childhood, but not her love life. Her lover Dillian thought that her psychosis was not a curse of damnation. She was simply misunderstood. His understanding was the love and support that were missing this whole time. Everything was supposed to turn great from that point onward, but the Nordic tribesman sacked Dillian's village, laying his spear-slaughtered body out in the wild. Grievance and sadness pulverized her body. Droplets of pain leaked into the world, contaminating her vision. If pain has a color, then it must be rusty black. The devastation that Senua had experienced caused her to do the unexpected. She beheaded Dillian and took the head to see Hela, the god of the north who controls hell. She hopes that by confronting Hela, it will bring back Dillian. It is a journey that she gambles with her safety. She faces horde and horde of enemies, and while she's fighting, the voices will still talk non-stop, sometimes helping her, sometimes mocking her. Those voices, those psychoses, are thus being called darkness in the game. And the reason why Hellblade is one of my favorite games is because it brilliantly uses the concept of darkness to affect both Senua and you. Right from the very start, the very first moment of encounter with the enemy, the game already showed the intention to paranoid the player. Usually, in any other games, this would just be the tutorial where you learn the basic control. And it did feel like that at first. You have a few exchanges and chops down enemy quickly. But there's always a scripted death in the end. Senua witnesses her own death, stands with disbelief. She sees her former self fade away with the cold corpse. This causes her to be more erratic than usual, forcing the darkness to spread like a vine, and scratches remove nothing for which it is not skin deep. This is when we see the line, the dark rod will grow each time you fell. If the rod reaches Senua's head, the quest is over, and all progress will be lost. The game is breaking the fourth wall, telling you to take this seriously. Your loss of progress, your loss of time will be equally real in this virtual world. It makes you feel that, from now on, Senua's personal goal is also your personal goal, while making progress as a team. This makes each fight more intense. You try to guess, have I been dying too much by looking at your right hand, eyeballing the severity of the spread, while enduring the physical torment of your enemy and the mental torment of your darkness. It is not you versus the world. It is you versus you and the world. A tremendous struggle to overcome in order to escape death. With all these odds stacked against you, you somehow reach far enough to meet Farad, a god of illusion. He is treacherous and full of trickery, but you rip through its illusion and bring an end to its deception. The witty deceit cannot outsmart you, nor does the fiery strength can manhandle you. The furious blow from the fire giant Surta is supposed to burn out your desire to live. Your cremation is supposed to be the fertilizer of his everlasting flame, but you do it again, achieving impossibility, quenching the conflagration with no water but his sword. You are closer and closer to the gates of hell. You face the guarding hound, Gamma, a beast that cannot be reasoned. It lurks in the dark to ambush you. You are helplessly hopeless. Neither one can leave this battle unscathed. But one will survive, and that one does not cowardly stay in the dark. The final showdown is near. The goddess that can grant us what we want is beyond our arm's reach, but within our eyesight. The silhouette of death somehow evokes hope. Enemies get spawned, and swords get unsheathed. You are so close, you are definitely not going to die now. You swing, lock, and evade. 3 basic moves that change the course of your fate. When you get ever so close, the goddess screams you awake, and the goddess of hell pulls up to her knee. Balaram, Surta, and Gamma are all now under her strings. But you had fought them once, so it would not be a problem to fight them twice or thrice. You are stronger now, you are better now, you have the perfect mindset. You are not going to die now. The ending is near and the reward is clear. Senua is going to get what she wants. You are going to get what you want. I am going to get what I want. To escape death, I just have to try harder. Grind harder. The voices in my head, the darkness, might say otherwise.
You're going to die.
Let go, Senua.
Stop.
But I ignore them as I have always done. Enemies keep spawning, I keep fighting. That's just the nature of man, to fight against death. That is the only way out. This is a game that takes death seriously. I am not going to die now. Then, I die. I was not meant to live. Just like the tutorial, the ending is also a scripted death. For a game that treats death as punishment, the last thing that they want players to do is to go against their own will. We spend our whole journey struggling against death just to prove we cannot in the end. And I know another similar story that sounds like this. This time, it is also lethally real because they are real-life human. And let me start this story with a debate. In 1964, the Japanese author Kenzaburo wrote a novel called A Personal Matter. The story is about a guy named Bird, an odd name for a character, but that's beside the point. The main focus of the story is between Bird and a baby, a monster-looking baby. Quote, an ugly baby with a pinched, tiny red face, covered with wrinkles and blotchy with fat. Its eyes were clamped shut like the shell of a bivalve. Rubber tubes led into its nostrils. Its mouth was wrenched open in a soundless scream that exposed the pearly pink membrane inside. The skull was buried under a mound of bloody cotton. But there was no hiding the presence there of something large and abnormal. It is a baby with brain hernia. It is a story that involves disability. It is a story of Bird's disabled baby. He had never thought that this would happen, so he chooses to escape. He meets the ex-girlfriend that he had in his school day and has an affair with her. He tries to use alcohol and sex to intoxicate himself from reality. He drank so hard that when he was doing his teaching the next day, he vomited violently. His students accuse him of being unprofessional, and he will later get fired for that. Meanwhile, he lies to his wife about the condition of their newborn son. He comes up with excuses as to why she can't see her child yet. He secretly hopes the child will just die and he can get this over with. But to his surprise, the baby gets healthier and healthier. It seems that Bird cannot escape the responsibility of having a disabled son. It bothers him so much that it even affects his affair. The mere mention of the word pregnancy and womb would immediately kill his sex drive. It is a story where a man struggles to pay his medical bills because he lost his job. He lost his job because of a crumbling relationship. He has a crumbling relationship all because he can't love the one he should. In the end, he tries to kill his baby with his mistress. But he fails. Somehow in the very last chapter, he chooses to take care of his own son. It turns into a conventional understanding of what we call the true ending. So this novel actually received a bit of backlash after its publication. And one of the critics is the Japanese writer三島由紀夫. He thought, is it always necessary for this kind of story to have a quote-unquote good ending? Why can't we go all the way through and just let the character die? For multiple reasons, it is quite ironic having Mishima Yukio to start this debate, because he wrote a similar story 8 years before a personal matter was published. The Temple of the Golden Pavilion is obviously a book about the Golden Pavilion. It is a historical monument that witnessed the changes in Japan for hundreds of years. And it is also a reconstruction of its former self, because it was burned down in the 50s. The arsonist was a mentally disabled monk from that temple. Mishima was fascinated by this incident, so he went on a field study to understand what was the motive behind the arson. The final product is the semi-biographical book, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion. This story, like a previous one, is about a protagonist with disability. The monk, Mitsuguchi, has severe stuttering. He always has trouble keeping up with the world because his speech lags behind his mind. But his disability doesn't stop him from having a bright future. After the death of his father, he is sent to the Golden Pavilion to be an acolyte and potentially take charge of the temple. His father used to say, the temple is the most beautiful thing in the world. So Mitsuguchi always wonders about the countenance of the temple. However, just like the story of birth, where the beauty of birth is met with disappointment, Mitsuguchi also faces disappointment. He said, I tried to look at the temple from different angles. I even slightly tilted my head, but I was not touched at all. This disappointment, however, gets overturned a bit when he realized even the critically acclaimed Golden Pavilion can be destroyed by external forces like earthquakes and warfare. This realization causes him to suddenly discover some hidden beauty of the temple. He therefore concludes that the life of beauty cannot be indefinite. This notion lays down a seed for what is yet to come. He originally has a chance to escape the thought of destruction. He has a good friend who always brings out his goodness. Moreover, Mitsuguchi is given a chance to study at a prestigious university. But just like a personal matter, a series of bad events happen. The unfortunate events include, but are not limited to, befriending a bad influence, the passing of his good friend, and in one instance, stepping on a lady's stomach, causing her to have a miscarriage. All these little things add up, forcing him to see that there is no future staying in the temple. He has squashed his own success, so he plans to burn down the Golden Pavilion. He prepares some pills and a knife to make sure, on the day of burning, he will witness the destructions with his own death. But here's the interesting part. After all these tragedies, when it is time to have a quote-unquote bad ending, Mishima lets Mitsuguchi to live on and let the historical Golden Pavilion burn to the ground. It's like it is refusing Mitsuguchi to die with history, to die with a stubborn thought. Isn't it intriguing? Mishima was doing the things that he will criticize in the future. The ending is also worth extra notice if we know the life of Mishima. He always surrounded himself with the concept of death and beauty.
すると死ぬのも何かのためということが必ず出てくる。それが昔言われた大義というものです。そして大義のために死ぬということが人間の最も華々しい、あるいは英雄的な、あるいは立派な死に方だというふうに考えられている。それでも心の中に自分を超える価値が認められなければ、生きていることすら無意味になるというような心理状態がないわけではない。
When he wrote The Life of Beauty cannot be indefinite, it is as if he was talking about himself. This notion, most notably, can be found in the movie that he directed himself. It was based on a short story that he had written years ago. It's mainly about a lieutenant and his wife. The lieutenant, which was reformed by Mishima, gets informed that his close friend has staged a failed coup d'etat. With such shocking news, he is forced to choose between being loyal to his emperor or his friend. In the end, the lieutenant chooses to perform the old ritual, seppuku, as a way out. His wife supports his decisions and will soon follow his footsteps. This fictional story is prophetic because It foretells the final hour of Mishima. Few years down the line, Mishima, in real life, staged a foul coup. Realizing his failure, he performed seppuku alongside with his lover at that time. Knowing this bit of personal history makes the Temple of the Golden Pavilion ever more interesting, especially if you notice the small but essential change in the end. Unlike the fictional version, the monk in real life did choose to go down with the temple. He survived only thanks to the medical help that he had received. The small change in fiction is like the last escape from death for Mishima, and the last line from the book contains the most haunting words that I've ever read. It simply said, "I wanted to leave." The Temple of the Golden Pavilion is Mishima's last struggle against his self-destructive tendency. A man who made a series of wrong decisions but still chose to leave. So what now? It seems like those who try hard to fight against death always end up doing the opposite. This is where I have to reveal something that I've left out. In the end of Hellblade, indeed, you will always face defeat, but that's not the end. In the ending cutscene, it is revealed that our mental image of the goddess from hell, the personifications of darkness, is actually Senua herself. And she can only realize this if she stops fighting, stops seeing herself as a problem that needs to be fixed. Only then we can realize our enemy from hell is just mental projections of our own. And the game actually does this to the player too. This whole time, the game is lying about deleting your save file. No matter how many times you die, it will not delete your progress. Your needless struggle is just an illusion from start to end. These lessons of coming to one's senses is perhaps why Kenzaburo chose to end his story with a living child. He was a person that had been through a lot. Born in 1935, he witnessed the horror of World War, and his father passed away when he was 9. He has the foundation to be decadent and write stories with dooming fate. Even in a personal matter, he shows moments of doubt for his life. In one of the conversations, Bird talks about the idea of multiverse with his mistress. He wonders which bird in other universe remains behind as corpses when he makes decisions between life and death. Which one of these dead is the most desirable? He then concluded that one thing was certain, not himself, not the bird in this universe. However, his mistress gives a comforting answer. I would say you probably have your final death of old age when you are over 90. A quite prophetic answer. Anyway, I guess now is the perfect time to not only talk about Owe's personal life, but also his family life. It's really hard to say how the destructions of Second World War had influenced him, because a lot of his close friends experienced sudden death after the war. Most importantly, 15 years after the World War, Owe had his firstborn child. The child was born in Hiroshima. And if you know anything about Hiroshima and the Second World War, you would know it is the place where they dropped the bomb. So when the nurse first saw his firstborn son, he or she was too shocked to even check if it is a boy or a girl. The nurse just yelled, "How come the baby has 2 heads?" This baby is called Hikari Oe, and he has disability. A Personal Matter is not a fictional book. It is a semi-autobiographical book. Doctors try to convince them to let their son die, but they refuse to do so. Even after an operation, his son still remains visually impaired, developmentally delayed, epileptic, and with limited physical condition. He is autistic, developmentally disabled, and does not speak much. To quote Kenzaburo Oe, "With the birth of my eldest son, who has a head abnormality, I experienced a shock like no other. I felt that I could no longer support myself, even with the help of my educations, my relationships, and all the novels that I've written so far. I tried to get back on my feet and engage in work therapy, and that's how I started to write a personal matter. So when he had his debate with三島由紀夫, he said the reason why he ended the story with an optimistic tone is not because of optimism. It is the fact that this is what art is about, a medium to face life struggle. It has never been a problem of right and wrong answers. Bird ultimately needs to save his baby because Kenzaburo Oe chose to live with his son. The baby lives on because his monster-looking features are just projection. He sees him for what he truly is, not a child with disability, but Hikari Oe, his lovely son. And this lovely son brings unexpected joy to the family. One day the family was watching TV, nothing out of the ordinary. It shouldn't be anything special. It should have been just another normal day. But Hikari showed special response to a particular sound. It was the sound of a bird singing. His parents were fascinated by this event, so they bought him a child's record with tracks of birds call, in which a woman would say the name of each bird before presenting a bird song. Then one day, while they were in the vacation home, a bird sang, and it caused Hikari to repeat the bird song from the record. This was when Kenzaburo Oe and his wife decided to find a music teacher for their son. Years gone by, instead of speaking, Hikari began to express his feeling through music and musical composition. He became a composer. Kenzaburo Oe reflected on this incident and said, "My mentally handicapped son, Hikari, was awakened by the voices of birds to the music of Bach and Mozart, eventually composing his own works. The little pieces that he first composed were full of fresh splendor and delight. They seemed like dew glittering on grass leaves." Hikari's music was in this sense a natural effusion of the composer's own innocence. And the piece that you are hearing now in the background is composed by none other than Hikari Oe. I guess it's not that weird to call a character a bird after all. I guess the answer...
So obvious. Music, of course.
The Midnight Gospel is a show with weird concepts. And for me, the strangest one is in episode 5. After Clancy tries to save his plans, he goes on to find his space cast guest. This time the location is a hellish place called Soul Prison. You cannot die in a soul prison. It can only be reborn. So off he goes, he flies like a comet and smashes right down to the prison cell. This is where we meet our guest. His name is Bob, a prisoner with disability, because he was so enraged by existential dread that he ripped off his tongue and developed speech problems. So a bird, his soul bird, voiced for him. While they are talking, you can sense that Bob is a disgruntled man. He fights over little things with his cellmate, which ultimately causes his own death. This is when we see the Egyptian mythology of weighing one's soul against a feather. This is the process of rebirth in soul prison. Bob is once again alive. He does what he always does, fighting hard again and again. So he keeps on dying, and dying. It's almost like the same person died 20,000 times. And in each rebirth, we see the suffering of the world. With such senseless death, slowly but surely, he changes his decisions in moments of critical danger. And he walks far enough to see his silver lining hope. It's like a thread falling from heaven. He first tries to monopolize this opportunity and fight anyone who tries to grab it. But this always causes his own demise. So he did the unexpected. He actually tries to work as a team, doing seemingly the right things to escape the hellhole prison. And yet, he still fails. He still keeps on reincarnating. And surprisingly, unlike other episodes, the escape of Bob actually matches with the topic of the podcast. They are talking about the Eastern philosophy of Buddhism. This is some of their conversations.
I'm going to become more loving, and I'm going to make some change. I'm getting points somehow, I'm changing. Buddhist perspective is, dude, you're grinding in World of Warcraft.
We want to continue pushing into the simulation. It's like we want to repeat what's already happened.
Anger, anger, anger. His entire life is colored and characterized by anger.
Yeah.
When he dies, he's angry. He's angry at God. Why did you give me this life? Why did you give me this life of anger and suffering? When Jimmy loses his body, he goes into the bardo, and it's just the trip of anger and rage, and all of his anger and rage is now personified to him as demons and wrathful deities and all this stuff.
Yeah.
And all the wrathful deities are trying to do is mirror his own state back to him so that he'll recognize himself and wake up.
The moment you accept things as they are, you don't need to hope anymore, because you realize that where you are is kind of okay.
When he truly senses how senseless the whole thing is, he is given a tool to control time. He now gets to choose what will he follow, continue the path of destructions or something else. I think the answer is obvious. The only question is, what is that something else? Well, sometimes the answer is like a sliding puzzle, because it is there all along. You just have to move the right pieces. He grabs onto Clancy, rewinds time, and escapes the internal suffering. And unlike other episodes, the planet doesn't get destroyed, and Bob seems to have survived. He glitches out like a game character, and is never seen again. But before he disappears, something else also happens. He looks into the mirror and grows back his tongue.
I can finally sing.